Yes, yes, yes.
Main,
Yeah. So yeah, one of the things I do is I staff.
But now that we
Set my data. So yeah.
Are you ready to start?
No. There's more than one. Okay, that's two. So I do work with.
Yeah,
That's
Meredith.
Yeah.
David, that's part of we need something to stay on that. Yes, like still have every so often, let me make sure, you know, I know. Well, this is the actual, this is now. Yeah, because it's still,
But it's not, you can't hear the talk.
but I think they can on the internet. They can't.
We can't hear it.
Oh, really? Can you normally hear it during the committee meetings?
No, we can't. No.
That's not, I think that's perfect.
Yeah, I think
all right, yeah,
we just
okay.
can't hear it, but I think it's still.
I haven't
It's
done any meetings
recorded.
in this room.
Oh, yeah, this is a weird.
Yeah, let's not do meetings here.
Yeah. It is a weird room though, objectively. Okay, great. We're gonna get started as an informational meeting. While we,
All the form, no, sure, we don't have.
okay, oh, okay.
Do you want to
So you will
call
do
it?
the-
You want to call like your meeting?
Oh, okay, okay. And then once Councilman Roy has been here, which is acknowledged with one. Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Special Committee on Environment Resilience. I am Chairwoman Stu Anderblock in Ward 3. And we are joined by the clerks and the Assistant City Solicitor at the shop and the Director of Sustainability, Priscilla David Cruz. So those are special guests who we'll introduce in a minute. But could you please call the roll?
Chairperson Underwood,
I'm here.
Vice Chairperson Sanchez,
Present.
Councilwoman Anthony is absent, Councilman Pedro Espinal is absent, Councilor Arroyo is absent. So as of right now, 2 present, 3 absent.
We do not have. a form.
Okay, so this is until Councilman Royce gets to this for information only, but it already was going to be for information, so it's totally fine. And I'm really excited to welcome Breathe Providence and Professor Meredith Hastings. And if there are other folks in the Breathe Providence Coalition, since it's informational only, does she need to be sworn in?
I can still swear her in.
Okay, that way when
Just
she
can't
gets
do it.
here.
Yeah, you just can't do any motions. Right?
Oh, great. She's gonna have to swear you in. Okay.
You can please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and your title, please.
Meredith Hastings, Professor of Earth, Environments and Planetary Sciences and Environmental Society at Brown University.
Thank you.
And will you also be presenting at all?
She'll answer any questions.
Just be, okay, should we just bear her in? Just really, yeah, that way we don't have to do it.
Would you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name.
My name is Grace Berg and I'm the project coordinator for Breathe Providence, working at Brown University.
Thank you.
Just repeat your last name.
Berg,
B-E-R-G.
B-E-R-G.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Professor Hastings and Grace. We're really excited to do this presentation. I'm also especially excited because Meredith works in North Grade and
Ward 3 residents coming up.
almost a lot of good people in Ward 3. But really excited for this presentation, and so we can just let you take it away. And is it okay if we ask questions during? Or do you want to switch to the
Yeah,
end?
we can ask questions during. Okay, cool. Absolutely.
Excellent. And we'll just pause for a moment when Councilman Royce gets here, just to acknowledge the forum. So I just don't want you to feel like.
Okay.
But yeah, and Claire will bring up the presentation. But thank you for being here. And thank you other people, all the members of the public for here. We also have time at the end for public comment and questions. And so there definitely will be opportunities for folks here to ask questions and at the end.
If people would like a copy, yeah.
She did give us some copies, so if
Yes.
she doesn't have one.
Okay.
Do you want me to hand them out, Meredith? I can do it while you get started. Oh, you're already done. Okay.
What's going on, Grace?
Yes, good to meet you in person.
So, oh, you response?
Well, I was thinking that I might see you here today, so I was like, oh, I'll just wait. But yeah, thank you so much for
Still in the works.
what you're doing.
Awesome, thank you.
So briefly, I just wanted to, if you were.
Yeah,
Back
feel
to
free
any of
to
you.
scoot to
So,
whatever makes
okay.
you feel more comfortable.
So briefly, I just wanted to introduce myself and have Grace introduce herself as well. And, you know, as we walk through the project, my intention is to give an overview of the Breathe Providence project. Several of the people who are in the audience are also members of a resident task force that we've developed with the RDJC and the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee, and then CLF, the Conservation Law Foundation. So I wanted to just give an overview of the project, some opportunities that I see right now, but mostly to raise awareness of the people who are part of this council, this special committee, and look for ways that we might support each other. So I'm Meredith Hastings, as I stated, I'm a professor at Brown University. I've lived in Providence for 15 years now. I have a 12-year-old and 11-year-old daughters who go to middle school now in Providence in public school. And so, yeah, and as I walk through the presentation, I'll try to tell you a little bit more about kind of where this project started. And then my research background is in atmospheric chemistry and air quality, but also in biogeochemistry and climate. And I teach at Brown as well, and I teach classes such as weather and climate, air pollution and chemistry, and environmental studies and pollution. And between my teaching and my research and doing some testing here of different methods that we've developed in my lab, I got really interested in the local atmospheric industry, even though my research takes me kind of all over. But I started getting more interested in, what was the air quality here and what was really going on with air quality. And I had a lot of questions based on our methods, like some statements that have been made, by various agencies about the state of our air quality that didn't add up. And so it just made me more interested in studying it as a scientist, but then there's a lot of other reasons that make it even more important to do. Grace, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah, so I'll introduce myself quickly. My name is Grace Berg. I am the project coordinator for Breathe Providence. I graduated from Brown in 2021, and during my senior year, I became interested in understanding how air quality changed over the course of COVID and what we can learn from our government operated network, but really finding that it kind of raised more questions than it answered about what the primary sources of air pollution were in the city. So we collectively began working on thinking about how else can we monitor air quality and do so in a way that is much more responsive to community priorities. So that's that's about me.
So just as a brief kind of primer introduction, I'm guessing that a lot of us are aware of this, but air pollution has both short-term health effects and long-term effects. Globally, it's the fourth most common cause of death, usually through some type of cardiovascular or respiratory illness. So you can have cardiovascular and respiratory issues in the short term, so exacerbation of asthma, coughing and wheezing under poor air quality conditions, but then there's also long-term effects and chronic conditions that can develop if you're exposed to poor air quality often. One of the complications, or the air pollution is complex. We have a lot of different sources. Some are natural, some are man-made. The man-made ones tend to outweigh the natural ones, particularly in cities. But we also have to contend with that there are natural sources of air pollution as well. Pollution moves. Pollution doesn't obey neighborhood, state, country boundaries. So it moves with the weather. So it means that, where source is doesn't necessarily mean that the impact of that air pollution is right there. So we have to contend with that as well. And there are connections, of course, between air pollution and climate change as well. So as Grace mentioned, she and I were working on a project together when she was a senior, and she made these maps as part of her project. And this is just pulling information that's publicly available and mapping it. And so the left-hand graph in the colors tells you demographics. And you could pretty much simply read that as sort of non-white demographics, but it also includes socioeconomic factors in addition to race. The stars, and they're a little hard to see, but there's 4 blue stars. So if you look up towards the top right corner, there's East Providence, Pawtucket, and then there's East Providence, and then Cranston. Those blue stars are the current DEM monitors. So air quality in the United States is federally regulated, and states have to comply with the federal regulations. So the cities and states are responsible for monitoring their air quality and meeting the federal regulations. So DEM's in compliance with the federal regulations. But if you look at these maps, so the demographics on the left, the adult asthma rates on the right. Rhode Island has, and Providence County has the highest national rates of asthma amongst adults, and we're closing in on that with our children as well. And so, you know, just looking at these maps, I think it raises some questions, like the right-hand map. You know, Washington Park in South Providence, I think there's, you know, long been issues to contend with there related to the Port of Providence. But we also have areas in Smith Hill and Federal Hill and Olneyville that also, and in Pawtucket, we see these really high rates. And so one of the questions I started asking was, well, it can't be the same reason in every single place in the city. And how much do we know about the differences in air quality? The way that these monitors are set up, the only place we have kind of what I would call sort of full air quality information is in East Providence. And so they're measuring kind of all of the major criteria pollutants. So particulate matter, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, and ozone. All the other stations are typically measuring 1 or maybe 2 of the criteria pollutants. And so, you know, you can see just simply that we're not measuring kind of where the highest concentrations of asthma is occurring. And so do we really know the connection between air quality in our city and the asthma rates that are? Yeah, go ahead.
So in the places like East Providence and I guess Cranston for the second, is that because like the municipality is taking like the extra step, or DEM just has those devices? to
It's
monitor?
DEM taking the extra step to monitor in those locations. So Cranston, you can jump in here too, Grace, if you want. Let's see, the Cranston site is a near road site. So the idea is that you're capturing some signal that represents near highway concentrations. And so cities, I think, are asked to do that. I don't know if they're required anymore, but they're asked to do that. And DEM is monitoring for that purpose in Cranston. In Pawtucket, I think it's similar. Do you know the reason behind that station?
Yeah, I think it might be a similar reason. They only measure that one criteria pollutant, and they also report like much less frequently than the other sites. So it's really that Providence monitor that is giving us the inside the city look.
Royals will join at some point, but it's safe here and. Yeah.
So-
Absolutely, very exciting.
Mr. Hastings, have you and Grace studied all of these? You looked at like, how these map onto the urban tree cover, and if there's any other effect of like pulling things out of the air, like in some of the areas where the rates are low?
So that's something that we might be able to query with our data, because we actually have data across the whole city now, and I'll show you in a couple of slides like where our air monitors are. Yeah, so we could, we have looked at those maps as well. So that's one thing we can query in the data. I'm not sure that it's going to make a big enough difference to be able to actually detect with these low cost sensors. I think we have to have really sensitive equipment, but we'll see, because we did purposely set up, like, some of the stations are on a, you know, busy, what we would consider sort of a main street commercial area of a neighborhood.
Yeah.
So you maybe have something like Broad Street or Broadway or Polk Street, you know, the east side. And so, you know, Polk Street and Broad Street have, like, you know, very different businesses, even though it's all businesses, and very different trees.
Yeah.
But it's all businesses and it's, you know, pretty steady traffic. So it's really interesting to compare and contrast, like, at that scale.
Yeah.
And I'll show you some of the station data as well today. Yeah, so we're starting with this, and again, like the, you know, DEM, to their credit, is doing what they should do. And probably doing more than they really have to be doing. But again, it's not really capturing what we know to be true in terms of intra-urban variability. Next slide. Thank you. The national ambient air quality standards are set by the EPA. The states are required to monitor to see if they are in compliance with those standards. As I mentioned, to their credit, they're likely monitoring beyond minimum requirements. But the pollutants can vary on much finer scales. And then if you look at this chart, and this is just pulled from the EPA website as an example, we don't need to remember these numbers, but I wanted to give you a sense, like some pollutants like nitrous dioxide are regulated on an hourly scale. So if you look at the top, it's like 1 hour, 100 ppb, which is parts per billion. There's also an annual scale. So over the year, you can't exceed this average value. For ozone, it's 8 hours or annual averages. For PM2.5, there's daily and yearly averages. But we don't breathe average air. And so again, the question we started raising was, how much is this actually affecting residents, and is asthma because of pollutant exposures? Does it not have to be that your PM2.5 is super high, but because you have like relatively high PM2.5 and relatively high ozone, maybe that combination is leading to, what we're seeing in terms of health outcomes. But then that again begs the question, like, well, what are the air pollutants in these different neighborhoods? Next slide. So the vision for this project is to improve local air quality, support greenhouse gas emission reduction, and support the communities of Providence to reach health and climate related goals. And so in order to do this, we actually need to understand the landscape of air pollution at a resolution that actually reflects humans' exposure to air pollution in their everyday lives. And the goal with the data is to support improved policy and local environmental and sustainability initiatives. And then we want to engage the university and youth, particularly at the high school level, more directly in contributing to the city of Providence's health, wellness, and climate-related goals. So Breathe Providence is a hyper-local air monitoring network. We currently have 22 sites, which I'll show you in a couple slides. We have a few monitors left to install. And the goal is to have 25 operating monitors year round to have at least a solid year of data across the city, to contend with the fact that we have significant seasonal changes. Where we started in trying to think about where to site the air quality monitors, again, thinking about the vision for this broader project to have an impact and be able to provide data to support community initiatives as well as city initiatives. We really wanted to make sure that we were informed in terms of what the community was saying. And one of the big inspirations for this project was the climate justice plan, because over and over in the climate justice plan, the residents were asking for more air quality monitoring and more response to air quality concerns. And so that was a guiding, that provided some guiding ideas. I saw Monica Huertas also give a talk around the time I had read the climate justice plan about her background and her story in Providence, and that was really inspiring, and also just concerning in terms of you live your life the way that you're supposed to. You try to strive for the American dream, and then you live in a place where you can't plant anything in the ground and your kids can't breathe, right? And so what are we doing in terms of actually supporting a city that can be healthy? So so these were a lot of the kind of resources we utilized at the beginning. You can go to the next slide. And then we reached out to a number of different community organizations. I'm amazed at the incredible community organizations we have in Providence, and how, and just how represented a lot of the different areas of the city actually are. So we reached out particularly to the health equity zones, Providence Community Health Centers, libraries, the REGC, the South Providence Neighborhood Association, other neighborhood associations, and talked with people about what they felt was important in terms of air quality, what they felt might support their organization's goals related to this project, and also what's missing in terms of our air quality information right now, and where should we be monitoring. So the next slide, just to orient you, is a picture of Providence, and this is Google version of the neighborhood overlays. So Providence, like the word Providence, right, is kind of right in the center of that map, and then you can see the neighborhoods around Providence, the word towards the south, southeast side of Providence, for example. And so incorporating, the things that we were learning from the community, We also wanted some way, you know, of creating some way to quantify kind of what we were doing across the city for ourselves. And so one of the students that I was working with, Meg Fay, came up with this air quality vulnerability index. So you can hit the next slide. So vulnerability is an interesting term. I would say that even in academic circles, vulnerability is argued about in terms of what it really means and what that word represents about a community. And as an example, from a community person's perspective, you know, somebody in the community's perspective, what you feel makes you vulnerable or not vulnerable may not be the same way that, for example, the EPA or some other entity might define it. And the example that I've been given a few times is household composition. And so, you know, we looked at things like asthma rates, household composition. So that is, you know, how many people are living there, how many children and how many elderly, because they tend to be more vulnerable. The children, because their lungs are growing. And so if they're taking in dirty air, then that's affecting their lung growth and their lung capacity, their lung health. And then the very elderly, you know, for similar reasons, but more because they're more sensitive, or they may already have conditions that make them more sensitive to poor air quality. But then the aspect of household composition that gets sort of that household that is vulnerable because it has older people and younger people living there. But then people would argue that, well, but I live with a large family. So if I am sick, I actually have a very big support network. And so I'm less vulnerable than if you were single living in the city, not with children or the elderly. So just to say that this, yeah, there's some caveats to what vulnerability would mean here. But these were the things that we were taking into account. And looking to see if that would provide us with a quantitative metric to sort of give us a sense of where the areas were that we should focus our efforts. And so the purple areas are the areas that would be considered most vulnerable with this metric, largely driven by those asthma rates, but a number of these other factors. So the black triangles are where our monitors are found. And then the colors refer to this air quality vulnerability index. The lighter colors, the yellows, greens, being less vulnerable, and the purples being more. And so I think one thing you might notice, you know, I mean, of course, we have more monitors than DEM. We're also perhaps in some ways over-representing the areas with the most vulnerability, which are also the areas that we have the least air quality information about up to this point. Next slide. So our 22 sites include 5 elementary schools, 3 schools, 3 libraries, 3 colleges, a medical school, community center, 3 recreation centers, and 2 community nonprofits. And a number of those places are what we think of as gathering places. So one thing that was important to us was to be able to bring this data back to the community. And so being able to be in places where people recreate, so it means that they're, you know, breathing heavily and utilizing resources in that area to be athletic. And places that, you know, people come to and gather so that we could you know, reach out and discuss with the community what we find. So what we're measuring, so every single one of those sites has one of these boxes. It's about the size of a shoebox, or maybe a little like longer than this computer. And we have gas sensors and a particle monitor, and then some electronics to be able to send the data, upload the data. And so there's carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, ozone, particulate matter, and then carbon dioxide, which is the climate relevant. So kind of our overall roadmap, and I'm not gonna do what time it is, but you know, speed me up or slow me down.
Oh, no, keep it. Yeah.
So the overall roadmap for me, and this is partly comes from what's expected of me when I write proposals. They have this sort of like, I don't know, there's something about 3s when you write proposals, about sort of 3 pillars. And so, so to me, the sort of the 3 legs of this stool is science, community, and policy. And so, you know, the science is really like, what do we observe in terms of neighborhood scale differences in air pollutants? Can we understand what the sources are? And can we disentangle sources versus meteorology, like weather influences on pollution patterns? There's also a need to improve methods for these low cost monitors. So, you know, the example I'm usually giving is like the carbon monoxide monitor is on the order of tens of dollars for us in that box. DEM is spending 100,000 on their monitor. So there, when we say low cost, like there's a really big difference. But low cost means that it's not as accurate, it's not as precise, and then it's of course questioned in terms of like, is it up to as reliable as the government data? So we're really working hard with DEM to make sure that our monitors are reliable and do represent the actual air concentration. And so they've been really supportive, and when we rolled out our monitors, we actually co-located them in East Providence at their super site. So every single box spent time in East Providence to compare to the DEM monitor, and then went out in the field. And then we've been working on some new methods for calibrating our monitors. And so that's also to say that there is some science side of that needs improvement anyway.
Are
Yeah.
DEM monitors collecting the same data that you're collecting, just better, like on the slide before you with the list of all the.
So they are collecting everything except CO2. So we don't have any CO2 monitoring in the state, and I just purchased a CO2 methane monitor that again, we're happy to make the data available. The CO2 will allow us to calibrate our CO2 sensors in the city. And then we'll also be able to add methane, and that will just measure continuously, but it'll be more of a, I don't know exactly what the footprint will be, but it should be more thought of as like a city average. On that note, and something that might be interesting to your office in particular, is that there's a paper, like a scientific paper that came out a couple of years ago where they looked at satellite-based CO2 concentrations and tried to back out CO2 emissions.
Yeah.
There's a lot of caveats with, observing concentrations that are at the ground from space compared to what we're seeing at the ground. But what they found overall was that cities across the United States are completely underestimating their actual emissions. And Providence was like number 5 worst on that list. So part of the issue with that too is that like all the cities are doing different ways of accounting for carbon emissions or carbon use, and all the cities are also doing different ways of accounting for how you plan for decarbonizing in the future. And so this may help us to at least give us some chance of monitoring, like, are we actually seeing a decrease over time? And yeah, so I'm a scientist, so I can go deeper into that. But again, the purpose of having this data is to really make it useful. And so we collaborated with the community on sensor placement. We're working on, with different groups about data translation and dissemination. And again, looking for ways to use this data to support local initiatives and organizations based on what we find. And then on the policy side, ideally, we would inform more targeted emission reduction policies and community health interventions that would actually be evidence-based. And we are also supporting the use of environmental justice frameworks within the work that we're doing, but also promoting that in city and state policy. So we are big supporters and fans of the environmental justice legislation and the green justice. Next slide. So I wanted to show you guys some examples of data. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions. We can also skip through this stuff really quickly, but the 2 examples I have in here are, well, I just have a couple different examples of data, and I included the wildfires just because I thought that might be of interest, but it's very different than our normal data score. So, but I wanted to come back to this idea about the government data and the way that we operate the government, the federal networks, and the way that we utilize that data can be. There's
Oh, and do we need to?
Yeah, do you want to?
acknowledge this one? Thank you, Councilor Bryce.
Councilor Royce has joined. We now have a quorum.
Thank you so much.
So this is an example of particulate matter concentrations data. All of the different colors are different stations. You can't read them. That's okay. But all of the different little lines are different stations. You can probably read them in your packets. So they each represent a different station around the city. The vertical axis is the particulate matter concentration, and then the y-axis or the horizontal axis is time. So what we're looking at is basically wintertime data. So it starts in November and goes through mid-February. And the 35 microgram per meter cubed line is the national 24-hour standard set by the EPA. The World Health Organization recommends a much lower level of 15 micrograms per meter cubed. So those are just pointed out just to give us some guidance in terms of what these levels might be. One of the things that I think we see right off the bat is there's a lot of short-term spikes at different locations. That was one thing that I thought was really interesting to see right off the bat, because again, we don't breathe average air, right? So we're breathing all of those spikes. So what does that mean for our health, even though we're not necessarily exceeding the national standards? So if you go to the next slide, this is what the 24-hour averaging does to the data, right? And they're on the same exact scale. So they both go to 80 micrograms per inclusion. And Claire, if you want, you could flip back and forth a few times just so you can see the difference, right? So, you know, it kind of collapses the data down into those daily averages. And while we saw lots of spikes that go, right, it's like we see a lot of spikes that go above 20, a lot that go over 40, and then a few that maybe get as high as 70. If you go to the next slide, you know, we average down, right? We're totally in compliance with the on average. And so those spikes are averaged out. We do tend to see like a fair amount of homogeny. So like the concentrations are pretty similar across the network in terms of the particulate matter concentrations. That's not always true, and it's not true for other pollutants, and I'll show you some examples of those. But again, it's just to give you a flavor for like the kinds of data that we're collecting. So you can kind of see if you look right close to like where the January, like right kind of in the center, you see kind of everything goes up into a higher concentration. That's what we call a network-wide event. And so we see it across the city. That particular event came from the South, so more from like New York and New Jersey. We haven't like investigated it in particular, but that's where like we looked at the transport and kind of just the pattern across the network. And you see it, you can watch the monitor sort of like light up. So you can see sort of the more southerly stations get higher concentrations, and then the middle of the city get higher, and then the northern end of the city get higher. So it's definitely kind of like air that's moving through with pollution in it.
What was it?
We don't know. My suspicion is fireworks, but we haven't looked at it because it's right near New
Oh,
Year's.
it's right near the first.
I think it's right New Year's, but yeah, we haven't. But the reason we haven't gone into depth about it is because the wildfires happened this summer. So this is one of the students this summer wanted to look at wildfires instead of fireworks, because that was clearly a very impressive event. The next slide. So this is another example of ways that we can look at the data. So this is carbon monoxide. These are 4 different monitors. So the last slide I showed you like every single monitor, all of the data. Now what we're doing is collapsing the data to daytime patterns. So we're taking here 3 months of data, so January, February, March, and we're taking all of the midnights, all of the 6 a.m.s, all of the every single hour, right? 7 a.m., 8 a.m., whatever, and like averaging those hours. And so what that does for us is it gives us a sense of what the daily pattern of the pollution looks like. And so what you can see in the carbon monoxide data, so there's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, like you pretty much every single day see about a 6, 7 a.m. spike in carbon monoxide. That's our morning rush hour. And those tend to be the highest concentrations of carbon monoxide during the day in the morning. And part of that is because of the weather. So in the morning, we have our coolest temperatures and the air is more dense and kind of sits near the ground. So any emissions are just going to sit near the ground and not be well mixed. And then we go through the day, and by about noon or 1 o'clock, we have a lot of mixing going on in the air. The ground and the air have heated up, and we can mix out those pollutants out, and they get dispersed. Like so, you can kind of see again every day around noon. There's sort of a dip down in the minimum around 12 or 1, and then things go back up for the evening rush hour. So this high resolution data gives us a chance to tease apart. You can go back.
And is that like across different types of pollutants? You see that early morning spike, or is that like?
So this is PM. So the last slide was CO, and then this is the particulate matter. So you do see it in the particulate matter also. But can you go back on slide here for a second? Oh my goodness.
Sorry, I don't know what just happened there. What were we on?
Yeah, it's probably 4 more back. Keep going back. Back. Giving away all my secrets there. No,
Close your eyes.
Yeah, so this is the actual video. Okay, so one thing I just wanted to point out is on the bottom graphs, it's showing you those 4 stations collapsed to like a single day on the left hand side. So it's like just the hours of the day, not the day of the week, and then the other is the daily averages for the day of the week. So just some interesting patterns that emerge, like the medical school, which is the Alfred Medical School, which is in the Jewelry District, shows the highest CO concentrations over that time period. Meyer and Francis, which is our EPA super site, actually shows the lowest concentrations during this time period, which again is interesting to sort of think about in the context of, do we understand what's happening across the city when we just have these 2 stations? And again, in fairness, the 2 stations that DEM has for carbon monoxide do tend to represent kind of like the maximum and minimum. So it's giving you kind of that range, but then we average all the data anyway, right, to the National Air Quality Standard. So it's not giving us that information about how much difference there might be across the city. So the next slide was just the PM 2.5 over the same diurnal cycle, same daily cycles. There we see that Myron, J. Francis on the East Providence is the highest in particular matter. And that's because they're like they're downwind. So they're definitely getting a mix of the city and whatever transported pollution is coming into the city, like are showing up in this Providence. So it's not so the answer to your question, Sue, like we do see traffic patterns and other pollutants. But the other, like it's not necessarily true that the place that has the highest PM concentration has the highest CO concentration. So there are differences across the city depending on the sources of those.
This might be like to whatever, Brian, but like what's happening at midnight? Like why is it so high at midnight?
Because there must be local sources and the boundary layer is so low. So anything that's getting emitted overnight is
It's just
getting
getting
trapped,
stuck.
right? And like wind left and right will mix it, but it's not going to mix up very much. So it's harder to dilute. So we're just seeing like the particulate matters of the climb. It's also possible that a lot of that particulate matter at night is secondarily formed. So like a lot of the pollution during the day will mix to make those particles at night. So that's another possibility. So this is the wildfires this summer. So this is just again an example of our data. So this is showing every single station, every dot is an hourly average of the data. And the pre-fire period was in kind of the middle of May to the 2/3 of way through May, and then the fire period is considered the 2 weeks in the beginning of June. And what you can see is that this is PM 2.5, so particulate matter. The dashed line is the EPA annual standard. So I guess the main visual I wanted you to see here is that like the fire period was like a completely different regime than what we typically see in the city. And so, what we're typically seeing in the city is on the left-hand side, the concentrations are lower, but we do see a lot of spikiness. We actually see more variability under typical conditions. So the fire period just kind of raised all the levels up and it did it across the city. So there's like actually less variability across the city because we're just being blanketed. That's particular matter. Next slide. These are again some data from the wildfire period. So this was to show, so all of the stations are listed on the left-hand side. So if you're curious, I can tell you what the names are. But the WEC, the West End Community Centers, and WECC, for example, PHA is Province Housing Authority, TC is Province College. So these are box plots. So what they do is they take all the data and kind of give you a sense of the distribution of the data. And so the box is telling you kind of where most of the data falls, and the middle line is telling you the median of the data. And then those dots are considered outliers. So they're not typical, right? They're falling outside of that box, but they do happen. And again, we do breathe that in. So you can see that there's many more dots outside the boxes during the pre-fire conditions than during the fire period conditions. And again, we see kind of a shift up, right? All of the concentrations go up. We don't need to belabor this too much. I just thought you would be interested in it, but because this isn't really something we can do a policy intervention for. But we could think about health policy interventions under these types of conditions, right? But there's not really, unless we put up a giant air filter, we can't really prevent this kind of thing from happening. Next slide. I'll just show you one more. Go one more forward there. So the next two slides just what one of the students did this summer. She calculated like how many more average hours per day were people spending in what's considered unhealthy air based on the EPA standards. So this one shows it for 12 micrograms, and then the next slide shows it for 35. But needless to say, we were spending upwards of 5 to 10 hours a day in more hours a day in unhealthy air than we normally do because of the wildfires. So we may still see some health effects of that coming down the pipeline. Go forward. So coming back to this, Claire, if you want to just go ahead and put all of them up, I'll just explain them. There's like 3 little animations. So just click 3 times. Yeah, there we go. So I was just going to point out some opportunities that I've been thinking about right now. We're trying to be nimble and responsive. And we're really hoping to start digging more into interpreting the data as we move into the fall of this next year. We are looking to utilize the data in a health context. So we have started some collaborations with Brown University School of Public Health people. We're in touch with folks in that in various offices in DOH. And we also partnered with several of the HESs. So 2907, 0295 in Central Providence. And so we're hoping to bring our data back to them, but we also partner with them in choosing sites. And ultimately, we're looking to, be able to specifically say what sources are contributing to the patterns that we're seeing. We're also thinking a bit about outdoor versus indoor air, and the Rhode Island Department of Health with EPA funding is rolling out an indoor air pollution study, an indoor and outdoor air pollution study for particulate matter starting this fall. In Providence Housing Authority buildings that are near the highway, the 290 905, I think. We've started a resident task force with the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee and the Conservation Law Foundation. And that has kind of two goals, well, or two different sort of main pivots. And one is focused around supporting the creation of the environmental justice legislation and the green justice legislation. And the other with the resident task force is to bring together community members who are interested in these issues and do some collaborative data sessions and some action workshops related to engaging those residents and raising their awareness so related to environmental justice and air quality, as well as environmental quality in general. We've been doing some outreach and education events. We're excited to go back to places we have monitors and talk to people about the data. We just did this summer, we did 2 events at libraries where we brought materials to build do-it-yourself home air filters, which have been shown in science studies to drastically reduce indoor air pollution and exchange the air very effectively, sometimes more effectively actually than expensive HEPA filters. So they're costing us right now about $60 per box to make, and we're looking forward to hopefully doing more of those and raising small pots of money to be able to support more of those. And that, we're studying outdoor air pollution. We're interested in how much outdoor air pollution is connected to indoor pollution, but we know there's also indoor air pollution sources. And so this was something we found last year when we were kind of reaching out and talking with community members that a lot of them asked, like, what can I do to help improve outdoor air quality? And I wasn't really prepared for that question. I really felt like I was coming in saying, like, we've got to get the city to do more. And we'll figure out what once we have data. But yeah, and so this was kind of in response to that of wanting to be able to, do something right now that can help people, and particularly this summer with such high particle concentrations. Like we were telling everybody, stay home, close the windows, close the doors, and like it's hot, and you get the indoor air pollutants as well. And so we were concerned about that. So and then on the policy side, which is really your domain, we're hoping to influence evidence-driven policy initiatives related to air and climate with having this data available. And then lastly, I'll just mention that there is the Clean Air Fund, which funds this project for 3 years. So I'm in the 2nd year of that funding now. At a larger Breathe Cities initiative. So their goal is to have 10 additional cities come online soon that will not be in the United States. So they're doing a global initiative to have Breathe Cities across the world. And their theory of change is really related to doing these networks, these lower cost air monitoring networks, and affecting policy changes to create more just and cleaner cities. And so they reached out to me recently, and was part of the reason I had reached out to Sue this summer. Bloomberg Foundation has put up, I think, $30 million in funding so far to support this initiative, and they're going to be doing some type of launch of that project in September in New York City, because of Bloomberg's role at the UN. And so they're doing something related to that, because this initiative is in collaboration with C40 cities. So the C40 cities are cities that have committed to climate initiatives, and mayors of those cities have got together as C40 cities to take on those initiatives across the world because of a lack of initiative by higher up leadership. So And so I think that there's a potential opportunity to also put Providence on the map as part of this like larger portfolio. Right now, they don't intend to fund any other cities in the US. So that would also make us a bit novel. But for us to kind of fit into what they consider their theory of change, we really need to have some commitment on the part of the mayor and the mayor's office to see through aggressive policy changes that are based, that are evidence.
Meredith, is that timeline for September? What is the timeline?
That's just for their launch of the Great Cities. So it was kind of put out to me as this opportunity where the mayor might have more interest in joining this opportunity at a time when there may be a lot of attention paid to the efforts of it.
And what's the timing of that window?
I don't know, and I don't.
You don't have to
they
tell
told
me, but if you can.
Yeah, they just told me September.
Okay.
I have to
We can
imagine
look
that they
out
must
for
have a date.
Yeah.
But I don't think they told me yet.
Okay.
Yeah, what, but I will find out, but I think it must be towards the end. I'm guessing it's towards the end. of the time. And we weren't necessarily invited to participate. We were just told that this was happening, and then there was interest in seeing, yeah, us be able to make a policy impact. And so, yeah, and so I was hoping that these folks also would get a chance to ask questions. I know that several of them are part of the resident task force with the REJC, and that's just getting started. People have been identified and have expressed interest, and September will kick off the actual collaborative data session. So I think that my last slides are basically like things and conclusions kind of thing. So I'm happy to discuss more or answer questions. And I'm definitely interested in collaborating more in the future. And we'll definitely be in touch with you. Thank you. With you about our CO2 methane monitor also. 'Cause I'm hopeful that the data might be useful, or that students can, do some things with maybe calculating the kinds of stats you guys need for carbon.
And we'll be also for my office, for department in contact with the RJC, but also would love to talk to you and as you're thinking about the data driven policy, the environmental justice act and the green justice.
Yeah.
So, are there any questions from the council members before we open it up to public comment questions? No question. I have a quick one, but I do want to make sure we public this time. We answered one. It sounds, actually, I agree with you really quick. You had mentioned in a prior slide about policy recommendations. Is that going to come to the data-driven policy recommendations from city level once you tend to kind of dig in on the data over the next couple months?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about some examples I've seen in other cities, which are mostly traffic related. But the traffic related is really interesting to me because in Grace's thesis, she looked at the COVID lockdown periods, she looked at March and April of 2020, where we have this, incredible natural experiment of taking a bunch of cars off the road suddenly and quickly, and right, much more easily than we would ever do if it was volunteer. So, so one of the interesting things is that the particulate matter did not drop considerably.
Oh, wow.
At the near road.
At the
site.
near road site.
And East Providence it did, but right next to the highway, there was almost no discernible statistically significant change.
Yeah, and so when I brought that up to DEM, oh, well, it's not really the passenger cars, it's really the truck traffic that's our main source of particulate matter. And it was like, okay, but if that's true,
But then
Then
the
we-
highways.
then we should, so like, if you don't see it next to highways, because well, we've decreased passenger traffic, but we increased truck traffic, and if they're the higher emitters, right, then like our
So that-
levels essentially stay the same. But if that's the case, then we should be able to pass legislation to tax our trucks, or insist that our trucks
Yeah.
have different emissions, or insist that they go electric, or a certain percentage go electric to help us control our air quality. So, yeah,
please,
sorry.
Chair.
Yeah.
So the real impact would come from state legislation and regulation.
Well, so it depends, right? So like, because again, we monitor and we regulate air quality at the federal level. But I think that there are ways through our zoning, through our, our local sort of initiatives to have some advocacy. Depending on what we find, right? So if trucks are the main, right, then that does seem like a more of a state issue, but within the city, we can maybe dictate like certain trucking routes, right? Or certain times of day. Like, okay, don't come in at 6 a.m. because all your emissions just stick around and affect the residents. I mean, I'm giving examples, right? I'm not,
Yeah.
but I'm just trying to, give a sense, like, and other cities have also created, like low emission zones. New York City has done that, right? Where they have like only a certain number of cars and trucks can come through downtown over the course of the day, so that you only have certain times when cars can come in, trucks can come in and out. A lot of the highways in New England, but not here, have barriers. I don't know if those are just for sound or if there's ones that could work to do sound and perhaps, decrease the concentrations closer to the highways, or at least disrupt, the concentrations closer to the highways. So, I think there are a lot of strategies, but I think that to me, it made sense, that we didn't really, people have asked me in the past, occasionally, right, press might call with a question, because I'm an atmospheric scientist, right? And a lot of times those questions are, well, what should we do about it, right? And it's like, I don't ever feel comfortable because I feel like, well, these are the main sources, so probably it's this, but unless I can prove that, I'm not sure that it would make sense to make a policy around it. And then when I started looking at the policies, it was sort of concerning, like, well, how much do we really know? And we don't have policies to do certain things, and we do have policies to do other things, but maybe those things aren't actually useful because we have these acid rates that keep going up and up and up, right? So what do we do, right? How do we actually change, change the numbers significantly? And so that's what we're looking for. I do think we are seeing a lot of transported pollution, but again, that could maybe make us think about, partnering with New York and New Jersey or the Midwest to reduce their pollution because it reduces our pollution. If that's really, what the main sources are. So, so I guess I just feel like we have a lot to learn, but that is also my bias as a physical scientist, but I wanted to get into more data to understand it.
And maybe relevantly to your question or your comment, Councilmember Reyes, is our October meeting will have a presentation from the Providence Streets Coalition about Vision Zero, which is mostly about reducing or eliminating traffic related deaths, but it's also about mode shift away from basically right now exclusively car as transit or transportation. And so that could be a place also when we think about like what are city level policies we could do to kind of mode shift away from like exclusively car and also make all transportation safer for pedestrians and drivers. But that'll be, stay tuned for October.
And I don't know, on the city side, I don't know, like residents have come up to us, like our neighborhood has 3 gas stations, but like nobody on my street has a car. So like, are there things that could be done in terms of city planning, right? Where we think about
Like
where
gas stations.
but yeah, do we need them at all? And then where did they get cited? And and our legacy of this is a whole other story, right? Where there used to be
That's next.
car washes and dry cleaners and and gas stations, and you didn't even know that there was a gas station that used to be down the street from here, right?
Quick question, thank you, can you just explain where you're talking about the 40 cities coming together? What's the name of that project?
The C40, so the London mayor has become the chair of the C40 cities. And if you just Google C40 cities, it'll come up, but it started with 40 cities, I think there are more. But I think it started with 40 cities mayors who got together and said, we're not seeing the kind of ambition at a higher leadership level that we want. And, the cities are really the front lines, right, of feeling the effects of climate change and environmental change. And so they got together and started the C40 cities initiative. So that includes cities across the world. So it's a national or international.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe Director Taylor Cruz or Professor Hastings, but so Mayor Boers signed us up to see cities, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I don't know if
I don't know that we got a recommitment from.
Yeah, I'm gonna double check that.
Yeah, and I think, when we started this, Lorenzo was still in office, so we had made a lot of connections in the city offices. Some of those people have moved on as of yesterday. Some of those people have moved on a while ago, right? With the new administration. So, we're looking to make more inroads with the city.
Does anyone else around the table have any questions or does anyone from the public have any comments or questions?
This is Kai Cameron. She's now works with the RAJC, organizing the resident task force.
Thank you, Kai.
Thank you so much for your work. Is there anyone in Zoom land?
No, so I was trying to get it on the screen. I've never had it.
I have a question, Chair.
Please.
Miguel Youngsville, I'm staff for the city council policy staff. I have a question about the beacons. The nodes, the beacon nodes. I'm sorry if you said this, when they're installed, where are they typically placed, like on telephone poles? Like I see like, where I'm at elementary schools and like the locations, but like. Where are they like physically attached? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so it varies a little bit. So all of them, I didn't, you know, but so we aimed for 1 to 1.5 story buildings.
Yep.
Some projects of this type have done measurements at the ground, which is a bit more ideal because it's where people are breathing, in terms of actually measuring what exposure is, but much less of an ideal situation in terms of you know, weather, traffic, people, things like that. So and power. So we did 1 to 1.5 stories in general. Many of them are on like a tripod, just a short tripod on the roof, and then with like cement blocks or sandbags to hold us down. Some of them are attached directly to a pole. One is attached to a pole basketball court. That's not used, pole, that's not used.
Pay attention, I might.
So, yeah, so you can see like the DPW one on Allen's Avenue, you can see it from the street. The child and families, I don't think you can see it.
I think you can.
And you can, again, any street, you can see that with the street. Yeah, so there's like a Rochambeau, you can see the street.
Are they all pass through sensors, or is there any also like sampling in terms of like the particulate matter one is so interesting to me, right? Because there's so many hitchhikers that foot wise and
Oh, I had thought about that, yeah, standing, yeah. Good handling there. What was like?
Oh,
think about that.
There is no sampling, the samples actually.
Oh, right, there's a fan, right, that just helps like air to pass through, but it's just measuring like the air concentrations, it's not sucking into it.
Oh, please, and can you state your name for the record?
Yeah, hi, I'm Leo. I'm also engineer in energy systems and also a student at Brown University. I'm curious, I know you said like the data around sources and pollution is still like not very certain, but I'm curious how much of that is coming from wind plants, generation plants in Providence, and also just like even though it's like what is very overall view of the sources of.
You wanna talk about the power plant? It's not actually included in them, right, in the IDI.
So the Manchester Street Power Station is.
Yeah, the Manchester Street Power Station.
Well, so
I feel like I haven't given you any chance to talk.
I know, well, so we have, I guess the short answer would be that we don't yet have an understanding of the contribution of stationary sources that the power plant would like is the street and port versus our kind of mobile sources like horse and trucks. We do have like inventory of our top emitters as they're permitted by the EPA. We can put that up to Providence and like locate them on Athens, exactly where they are. But because we know so little about when they're emitting pollution, you know, we have an annual total. Are they emitting it all during one time of year or all during the day? It means that information that would help inform our analysis a lot, and our analysis might help add that too. I don't know, but it's very much so.
Like we're seeing some interesting, like there's one where we're looking at where it's like Friday night, overnight Friday night, there's something going on all the time. And it's like, why? Like, so, yeah, so like, what is going on there?
I would love our energy administrator to look at that, because right now he's going, David Rivera, our energy administrator, is updating the greenhouse gas inventory of, for Providence. So it'd just be interesting to have a look at that.
Yeah, we can send you the CO2. Right now, we're referencing our CO2 data to Boston because we don't have a monitor in the state. But that'll change once we have our monitor.
Councilman Rice, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I'm sorry if you both already just said this, be honest, in 2 seconds, so it's been a long day, but I just, for the sort of, let's say, the top brewers, why is it that if we know how much they contribute to pollution annually, why is it that we don't know? You know, is it they won't give us details around their operations and why there might be an uptick in pollution on a specific day? Is there laws that doesn't allow us to get to more details of that?
So some of it is compliance, right? Like compliance follow-up. So, my understanding from DEM years ago was like they were really short-staffed and they were really concerned about the lack of ability to follow up on complaints. They've, put more resources into that. And so now they're much more responsive than I think they have been in the past, but that's my personal opinion. So I don't know if that's true for like residents who live, like, let's say at South Providence and Washington Park. But they are at least being more responsive, whether or not they can get the companies to pay fines. But the issue, I think, with the way the system is set up is that it's set up for compliance. It's set up for industry to say, we won't do this. But if we do, right? So the state very much is playing this role, right? Like the DEM and then the state, attorney's office very much playing this role of like, no, you did wrong. So now you have to clean it up and you have to pay for it. But so much of it is like, but the damage is already done.
Yeah.
Like the residents have already been exposed. You've already breathed this in. It's already in our water. It's already in our soils. And now we just have to like pay for it. Like, so I think the whole system in that sense, I think is a much bigger problem, right? In terms of how it's sort of broken. And again, maybe something that we can try to modify at the local level, right? Where we have our businesses like be more invested in what are they contributing to emissions. Also have a better sort of link and understanding between these like the larger industries. So the larger industries, I mean, they report their emissions to EPA, their requirements for what they have to report. Some places, not here necessarily, but some power plants have to have actual monitoring on site, right? To comply. I mean, I can tell you that the industry doesn't, right? I mean, nationwide, there was like many years ago, there was a satellite-based study that looked at aerosol concentrations, so particle concentrations in the air. And what they found, like one of the first epidemiological studies that did that, they found that like the day after EPA would do site inspections is when they would do all their emissions. So it was like, and you could see it in space, right? So, and this was like in multiple states, right? Multiple counties, like, so, and it was like visible, right? So they kept, would see these patterns and it'd be like, why are we seeing all these emissions like on these particular days? And then they went back and they were able to find that like the EPA has to announce certain dates, and then they were able to see that it was like, just like clockwork, right? So industry isn't complying. So what do we do, right? And that goes into this environmental justice piece where if we're not using that lens to think about these issues, then we're not really going to counter the impact that they've had. And so, across like the Clean Air Act is a huge success story. Our air is vastly cleaner in this country than it would be otherwise. We can easily see that in other places in the world that don't have, right, the stringent controls that we have. But that clean air has not gotten as clean for everyone in the country. And so how do we contend with those areas that are not seeing that? And it's all connected, right? We have, poor air quality, we have poor water quality, we have poor health outcomes. Like, so then that's straining our, our healthcare systems. So how, it's all connected. And so I think that, having a committee that's dedicated to like environment and resiliency to me just seems like so exciting, because it means that it is like Sue was saying, you can think about these connections and sort of the different spaces and places and how these are all burdening our residents. So how can we change that?
And we now have a chief of policy of resiliency, so we're trying to also on the administration side connect all these things. And it's making it I don't have no comparisons I got here only 4 weeks ago,
Yeah.
but just the amount of collaboration that's being fostered, like planning, sustainability, recs, like all work together to figure this out. So
Yeah,
that makes me feel confident.
yeah.
Did you have another question, Councilman?
It just reminded me of like the other meeting we had like months ago, we were
Yeah,
talking about
Clara.
the EPA. And I think it was like the situation or the dynamic where we had limited EPA inspectors, so to speak. I could be getting this wrong in the in the whole region.
Yeah, for region one.
In region one, and then like, but. In order to be, like, it was reactionary where like. Like in order to really find out when a big business has really polluted the area. I believe if I have it right, it's on them to report it. And it's like, wait a minute, like we should be having folks there do routine inspections. So I've been like troubled by
Yeah.
that, and I think some of it is beyond the city's control at the federal level. But then when we talk about the DEM, feel like we could be creative with certain zoning or whatever that
Yeah.
has to be, but that just that reminded me about sort of the EPA conversation. Is, big business has our government captured and they've created laws to benefit them in every way. It's the more I learn about this stuff, the more depressed I become, truthfully, but this room is what gives me hope, so.
Yeah, we have the director of the survey company, she was talking about, particularly like in the port, like, we were asking how we. Exactly what Councilor DeSantis described, it was the same, like you have to wait until there's like a terrible situation.
Right.
And for them to report it, and everybody's already like, put that in their bodies. And then maybe something happens, but probably not, you know?
Right. That reminds me of the, as the DM had done a year-long, toxic study at the port. Where every week they went and collected canisters, so we have these like evacuated canisters, so you can open them and then the air will rush in. And so they collect for a certain amount of time, I don't remember if it's hours or a day, to get well mixed air, and then they take it back to the lab, and then they measure for a bunch of different toxics, like some that are, directly cancer causing, some that aren't regulated, but we know aren't good. And so that data, they have the data, but they haven't got a report yet. They just have like a midterm report, which just has the data, doesn't have any conclusions from it. But I'm really curious to see what comes out of that. We have a sensor, a DPW, which measures like volatile organic compounds, but again, it's a relatively low cost sensor, and it's kind of a general, it's supposed to be measuring formaldehyde, but it's definitely measuring way more than that. So, but again, we're seeing such interesting like timing of those signals that we're sort of curious, like, is that because of, something happens with the port with this particular, this night every week, or is it something that they're doing that they shouldn't be doing at night, right? That's unclear, right, from our data so far, but I think that the community toxicity, their toxicity is really important to, to see what the outcome of that is and understand what they find. I did hear from one of the public health environmental tracking team folks, who I think it's somebody from our right around DOH was talking about, that there are toxics that Providence regulates at like lower levels of the federal requirements. So there are certain toxics so there is ability to make policy like that, but I don't know, right? I don't know how that works, right? And it may be something where if there isn't an EPA policy, then you can set your own. But yeah, we will look more into that as that data.
Meredith, I don't know if you've talked to anyone over at planning, but the more we speak, I think the more productive it might be for everyone. Right now, we're in middle or starting our comprehensive planning. That we do once in a decade. So I think having your opinion on at least this type of stuff throughout that process would be super important.
What's the timeline for the comprehensive plan?
So right now we're just doing like community like info sessions. I think
The Ward 3 one is on the 28th. But I don't know when it ends.
I think it's a 2-year process.
it's like 18 months. I think like the first 6 months, it's like collaboration, and then at that point, the city's planning department will kind of put everything pen on paper and then kind of send it back to the community for feedback. And this is kind of my general
And
understanding.
I'll add, we are working, the Department of Sustainability and Planning have been working on the zoning study with a committee that's just really looking at the goals of the climate justice plan. And then letting us know if that is through like an ordinance, if this is a comp plan thing, or we should look at other measures. So we're hoping that that will be finalized in September. So that way we can have
I
it
feel like the
presented
final
here.
study.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, what we heard from planning is that they would also like that finalized in September before the formal public hearing process starts for the comp plan, which I think I heard is like late October. So they'll continue the engagement, that's happening now through October, then get into a more formal process. And they'll have that zoning study at their display too. But I agree, having your information would be really helpful, because it's not finalized, but one of the things that they did share early on with the committee is just looking at what other things exist around other cities. And there was something in there like an air quality act or some city that looked at that in
Yeah.
particular
Yeah.
and saying we want to do better in terms of our air quality. So it does have recommendations like that too. It will happen.
Okay. I guess two questions. One is, maybe, would you mind if I introduced you to Joe Mogan, who's the head of the planning department?
Sure.
And Tim Shea, who's been moving the outreach, that way
Yeah.
we can
We've
get
met
him this
Tim.
presentation.
Yeah, we've met Tim
Oh,
at
right.
the Central Providence.
Who's the
I
best?
think.
Tim is the best, former Ward 3 resident.
Formal.
I don't know if Kevin like knows quite as much about what we're doing as
And
Albert
he's
is.
listening in, and I'll talk to Kevin tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, but I was saying to Grace today, because I just told her today about that elder leaving, so it was like, oh, we should connect with Kevin and something like that. I know there's a few. But I actually have been sitting on the committee for that study, for the zoning study, so I've learned a lot about that and the comprehensive plan doing that. But yeah, I would be love to be able to bring forward like, some data driven results this fall and like into the winter. I think it would be a good time for us to, sort of say, like, give you more sense of what we're actually seeing in the data. And how we might be able to bring this together. And in talking with residents too, it inspires us to like, because a lot of the questions like, oh, well, we can go look at our data for that. One of my grad students is really interested in public health, so she's getting permission, in the process of getting permission from the Department of Health to access emergency department related data, so we can look at correlations in that with our data across the city, right? So that's tied a little bit closer to where you live rather than just based on the one monitor and your zip code.
And the second question was, so, Director Bailey, if the zoning study will be done in September, will it be done in time for our September 13th meeting? Should that be on the agenda? We can touch base, but I'm just out loud saying September 13th.
Kevin and I can confirm that by next week. Right now, the consultant's making final edits. And then we have to go through our internal process. But yes, Kevin said he's happy to talk to you. He is here. But yes, Councilwoman, we can confirm that next week. But ideally, September would be a great time, September 13th.
And
And
then we
then,
have another meeting too. That's just, we already have that.
Okay.
Yeah. Looking at the other counselors.
The more meetings, the better.
Exactly.
I missed it.
And then, one question then maybe for you, Director Daly, is the city's carbon accounting has come up a few times. It sounds like David is working on the update.
Yeah.
And also, I think from when former Director Kuhn used to do the reporting and present it to the Sustainability Commission, that it was consumption based, not what's. So it's about like what we're using, but we're not like accounting for the fact that we're also have a lot of, we've got a bunch of food in the industry here. So I wonder if David could come present on that at some point to us, and we can talk through that methodology. It sounds like maybe we're missing.
And
like,
it's, and to be clear, like many cities
Yeah.
are doing it based on consumption because
Yeah.
that's a metric they can get,
Yeah,
right?
and I think it's like Boston was doing that, so we decided to do it. I'm forgetting the reasoning. I have to look back at my old notes.
yeah, it was like Massachusetts, Connecticut was sort of to be aligned with the peers, more of a state thing. But yes, and David could come. I think that we'll be ready for primetime presentation in October.
Oh,
And then
okay.
around that time, we'll have a report and presentation with it too.
Awesome. And then I think, do you have your hand up? No pressure. Yeah, hop on in, please.
Hi, my name is Nicole Vitacina from the WRWC, the Master Collective Watershed Council. And just a question, I believe that you mentioned there are 22 sites currently being monitored. And the goal is 25. How could you determine the other 3?
So right now, I don't have the picture, right, but if you look at the picture of where the sites are, one of the recommendations based on carbon dioxide monitoring is to try to essentially have your network set up grid that is like approximately 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. So if you imagine sort of like a, squares covering the city, what we're missing in terms of that grid is Mount Pleasant and Charles. And so we're keen on those 2 areas, and I think Grace might have
Got your voice
talked to
out,
both of you,
but I spoke with you.
Yeah, you don't have to call us out like that.
Very quickly, very
So
just-
great that there.
we just got
No, I've been
recommended
I've been
to
asking
contact
folks.
you guys to have help, because we've been looking into places in those neighborhoods, and it's been hard. Mount Pleasant is a little bit hard because it's just so residential. And a lot of the places we've had that right here. Businesses. And then Charles, you had a really good lead for the.
Yeah, we were about to move forward with the Vinci Center, but the power situation on the roof, the facilities manager was uncomfortable with this. He's like,
Oh, yeah, we're, that's a huge issue over there. So you just need like a roof or?
a roof with electricity,
That's not small.
That's too tall.
Yeah,
like 1 to 2 stories.
yeah, 1 or 2 stories.
I'm wondering,
But we.
sorry, let me.
Yeah.
We'll get talk.
So that's one issue, is that like, this, in terms of mapping off the city, we're missing kind of that area in the northwest. And then, that still leaves us with one additional monitor, which we were hoping might come out of the resident task force discussion. I've also, once we actually have, like, what I think of as a speed data set, so like year round data, I also think we could think about, moving monitors, right? So if we start thinking about like, once we get into source of friction, it's like, okay, we really don't know what's going on here. But it's clearly like in this area, right, that are also doing the monitors, that are doing the monitors, diagnosing, or have some sort of hypothesis that we want to follow up on. That's awesome. Yeah, the beacon, I didn't mention it earlier, but the beacon network, so the nodes are called beacon nodes. Beacon is a project in Berkeley, at University of California, Berkeley. So it's their air monitoring network. So we purchased their any monitors that they use in California and a couple other places. So they kind of put that, it's all technology that existed, but they kind of put it all together in one box.
Any other questions at the table or out of the table? The bigger table, the room table.
And I'll just add that Kevin Frost, our deputy for sustainability, said, yes, public engagement should be doable with the zoning study. And he reminded me that what we'll do, be great to do with the council in September and also the Sustainability Commission, is that there will be a report presentation, but the idea is to take the feedback and then incorporate it into an actual final report. So the zoning study will be final until October after that public engagement. Okay. But yeah, so we'll coordinate on that. So any finals? Awesome. Well, with that, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you for that.
That's really Grace. Oh, and Grace, I had a final question. Can you share your thesis with us? I would love to read it.
Yes, absolutely. I have done a couple of follow-up analyses since then that go into a little bit more detail. So it's could probably send both of those.
Oh, yeah, I'd love that. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to read it. Yeah, send it all.
Yeah, and presentation has my contact info,
Yeah.
so feel free to. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited about this. And I think I even have like a little to-do list of all the stuff now I want to do based on this. So.
Give some of those suggestions
Yeah.
for being late.
Oh, we nominated you for a lot of things while you were.
Oh, okay.
I'm just gonna volunteer for a bunch of stuff. And for committee members, so we are meeting on the 13th of September. I'll circulate in a way that's not violating the meetings, a survey that I'm working on for, so just, so you know, I've been working ever since our public hearing on the building energy reporting ordinance. I've had like a number of meetings, so there'll be like some minor changes to that, but the plan is for us to vote on that in September. And then we already have a presentation set up from the group called Block Power, which got brought up, you might remember, at the public hearing, which focuses on like electrification and access for like energy efficiency and electrification, particularly for low income communities of color. And making sure that there are resources available to folks in those communities as well. And they've done some really cool work in both Cambridge, New York, a bunch of places. So they're going to come present to us then. And the public is welcome to come then as well. It's going to be a really good presentation with some good action items if we can. But with that, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
It's up to me now. Okay.
All in favor?
Uh,
With all those, we're adjourned.